Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in the Elemental Talks program. Our topic today is delivering 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. And I'll say that again, 600,000 a year. This is the first session in our Zero Carbon Homes series broadcast throughout this month in partnership with BEAMA, the UK Trade Association for Manufacturers and Providers of Energy Infrastructure Technologies and Systems. The chair for the next 60 minutes, my name's Jim McClelland. I'm founder and editor of SustMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me on the panel this afternoon are Chris Stammers, Compliance Services Manager at BEAMA, Craig Dolan, Product Manager, Renewable Systems UK at Vaillant, John Williams, with two Johns, John Williams, Systems Engineering Consultant, Energy Systems Catapult, and the other John Felgate, Head of Technical at Stiebel Eltron. It is all live. Q&A to finish. Pop your questions in the Ask a Question box, probably at the bottom of your screen. The clue's in the name. You pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. So, a little bit about Elemental. This webinar forms part of a program of talks hosted and produced by Elemental, elementalexpo.com, online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You will find a full diary of events on the website with a range of upcoming webinars, including 6 more sessions in the Zero Carbon Home series with BEAMA, supported by Glen Dimplex, Drayton Controls, Vaillant UK, Lucy Electric, Schneider Electric, and AD. You can also view a back catalogue, broad range of topics, all available on demand, who's who of great speakers, and everything is free to access. So lots of infotainment to enjoy. So we've got a lot to get through today, so by way of a very brief intro from me, delivering 600,000 heat pumps a year. So heat, as we all know, effectively poses the biggest problem at present for decarbonisation of the UK, as it gears up to cut greenhouse gas emissions 68% by 2030, pursue a pathway towards net zero by 2050, which we'll be hearing about daily, almost hourly, all the way through to Glasgow COP26. So delivering on that target will require the retrofit of literally millions of homes across the country. Part of this drive to decarbonise electric heating, key role to play in turning those government aspirations into action and hopefully meeting some of those deadlines. So today we'll be drawing on the BEAMA electrification of heat white paper. Our event will take a closer look at the prospects and the progress or lack thereof made so far on programme implementation, installation, plus specifically the government target for heat pump rollout for 2028. How achievable is this under current market circumstances? What is required from industry to ensure that rollout is enabled? So our session, as I said, is the first in our Super 7 on Zero Carbon Homes. BEAMA and Elemental have come together to deliver this series, deep dive talks, and the drive to retrofit by 2050, low carbon heating to hit those net zero targets. Make no mistake, industry faces a big delivery challenge. And these talks positively want to discuss a way forward for our sector as we harness opportunities to combine emission cuts and, crucially, do so with better home health and well-being for the householders, the homeowners and the occupants. So, with that context, let the talks begin. So, as we start to explore how we can manage this transition to low carbon electric heating and optimize that rollout, all within that wider political context, I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, explain their perspective, and they're each going to share some opening insights. So first up, let's hear from the man behind that BEAMA electrification of heat white paper. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. And hello, everyone. As Jim has said, decarbonising heat is recognised as perhaps the greatest challenge to achieving the UK net zero target, and will involve fundamental change, not just to the energy sector and the grid infrastructure, but will also involve households engaging with what are, for many, unfamiliar technologies and products like heat pumps, and potentially having to adapt their behaviour and lifestyle to accommodate those products. Now, given the diversity of the UK's building stock and heat demand, it is possible that we will require a mix of technologies to decarbonise the sector, but it's clear that the electrification of heat will be a crucially important part of the solution. Now, currently, some 8% of households in the UK heat their homes electrically, but the majority of those are using a combination of storage and panel convector heaters, and yet the government's 10-point plan ambition is to install, as Jim said, 600,000 heat pumps per year by 2028, ensuring that heat pumps will play a decisive role now and in the future. The established heat pump market size in the UK totals approximately 260,000 units in operation, which is less than 1% of all installed heating systems. And heat pumps account for a small proportion of new space heating systems installed, with some 36,000 installed in 2020, although despite the effects of COVID, that still represents an increase of 11% over 2019. So to set the context, the government is calling on the heat pump industry to increase annual sales by a factor of 17 within just 7 years. And to increase the market by this order of magnitude in such a short period of time presents some significant challenges. So first among those is supply chain constraints. The EIS commissioned research last year to identify the capabilities of the heat pump supply chain to respond to the expected increase in volume. And this report identified that since the majority of heat pumps sold in the UK are manufactured by international businesses, that these manufacturers were very confident that they could increase supply into the market by a minimum of 25 to 30% year on year for the next 15 years through both importing and domestic manufacture. However, the message that came from this report was loud and clear. The decision to manufacture in the UK would be based on economic considerations, the most important of which is confidence in long-term market growth supported by long-term policy. The next challenge is installer constraints. Now, the number of trained heat pump installers is very low and was estimated at 1,800 in 2020. It's probably grown to well over 2,000 by now, but it really pales in comparison to the 130,000 fossil fuel boiler installers that the UK has. I mean, it's estimated the industry will need another 30,000 installers by 2028 to meet the expected demand for heat pumps. Now, industry is investing in new training capacity to meet this demand, but again, it's really relying on government to provide long-term policy certainty to attract installers to retrain from fossil fuel installations. And let's not forget there are implications for networks. By 2050, it's estimated that electricity could provide over half of the UK's final energy demand, as internal combustion engines, cars are displaced by EVs, and gas and oil are displaced by electricity for heating our homes. That could mean that electricity demand doubles from today's rate to nearly 700 terawatt hours. The significant role played by heat pumps in the decarbonisation of heat will inevitably lead to issues of peak electrical demand during the winter, as the demand in the energy systems historically would have been managed by the gas grid. And we think it's crucial, therefore, that the DNOs have improved visibility and notification of where heat pumps have and will be installed in the network. They need this information. It's essential for network design. Industry and the ENA have recognised the need to streamline the application process to ensure that being able to connect to the network is a straightforward process for installers. But there are still further refinements to be made to minimise delays in application approvals and mainly to encourage notification. Perhaps the biggest challenge of them all, however, is low consumer awareness. Now, we have to somehow convince the householder of the value of a low carbon heating system to them and the benefits it brings to the wider community and society overall. Now, lack of awareness of the need for decarbonisation is surprisingly high, with 32% of the respondents in a recent BEIS UK public awareness survey thinking that they had not heard of net zero. Yet, encouragingly, in August, after the IPCC report and the deadly heat waves, floods and storms that were experienced around the world in the summer, an Ipsos Mori survey reported that nearly a third of people said climate change, the environment and pollution were a major issue for Britain, putting it second only to the pandemic as a key concern. But although UK consumers might express a newfound level of concern for what's happening to the environment, few perceive heat pumps to be one of the solutions. So despite the fact that heat pumps have been around for over 166 years, and there's an estimated 220 million of them operating globally, only 30% of the UK population have heard of an air source heat pump. From the installer's perspective, there's a perception that consumers who do know of the technology not only think that heat pumps are too expensive, but also don't know enough about the benefits of the technology to request to have one installed or agree to having one fitted if suggested by the installer. So to counteract this level of ignorance by creating a compelling sales proposition for low carbon heating delivered nationally is challenging, time consuming, and going to be very expensive. So there's no way of getting away from the fact that the UK heat pump industry is actually quite small by national and international standards, and although manufacturers and brands will continue to shoulder most of the burden of promotional spend for this category, this expenditure will only be in line with sales budgets, which will raise awareness levels only incrementally over time. To build awareness levels to achieve the sales volumes anticipated by 2028 will require very significant upfront resources to be expended over a protracted period. So we believe government must do their bit to increase consumer awareness of heat pumps so that householders can begin to plan for changes to their heating systems. Another major challenge is the relatively high cost of a heat pump system. And once again, BIS commissioned research with heating system installers in May this year, and it cited the largest obstacle to take up of heat pumps was the installed cost. This isn't particularly surprising, as the average installed cost of an air-to-water heat pump is around £10,000, as compared with the average price of a replacement gas boiler of between £3,000 and £4,000. Although it's expected that as heat pump volumes will grow over the next few years, the economies of scale will ensure some cost reductions. But the reality is that in such a mature market, the likelihood of further reductions in costs of raw materials and components is low. So although the government can do little to affect the unit cost of a heat pump, we're going to have to rely on other government policy interventions to help to offset this cost. Now, over the last decade, the government has introduced a range of policies to promote renewable heating technologies such as heat pumps. The most significant of these was the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme, which has now been extended to March 2022, ahead of the launch of the Clean Heat Grant Scheme. But uncertainty surrounding the future of the RHI has consistently been cited as one of the barriers to the more rapid growth to the market, or of the market, I should say. The Green Homes Grant, which came into effect in November 2020, was perceived, as many of you will know, to have been launched too quickly and too late in the season, to be overly bureaucratic and with unachievable deadlines. So we think that for future schemes, government needs to work in collaboration with industry and consumer bodies to avoid the scheme being mired in a mix of red tape and lengthy delays, but with enough notice being given to enable the trade and the consumers to plan and respond. My final point is that I think, despite our criticisms, to achieve the level of heat pump uptake desired to ensure effective decarbonisation of heat by 2050 without significant policy intervention seems implausible. So the current consumer heat pump proposition, with high installed system costs relative to gas boilers, and without substantially lower running costs, it isn't strong enough to tempt the mass market to change their established heating systems without policy intervention. And relying on consumer-led schemes such as the RHI and the Clean Heat Grant will just not be enough. We believe the government needs to supplement these incentives with stamp duty rebates to encourage the installation of heat pumps, tax reductions such as VAT-free purchase of the heat pump and the ancillaries, carbon taxes to incentivize the shift away from fossil fuels, and most importantly, perhaps, the re-evaluation of the relative costs of energy. Now, currently, domestic electricity prices carry a much higher share of the environmental and social obligation costs than gas, which is kind of counterintuitive because of the rapidly falling carbon intensity of electricity, but also it's a requirement we've got a requirement to incentivize householders to choose an electric heating system. So it's paramount that the distribution of these costs is re-evaluated. If we're assured of all or even some of those, then we stand a much better chance of reaching the government's goal, which is a goal that the UK has to reach if we are to meet our climate change commitment by 2050. So that's enough from me. I shall hand back to Jim.
Thank you very much there, Chris. I mean, great overview, some sobering figures, less than 1% installed, a growth factor of times 17, 30,000 new installers. We've got skill shortage, supply chain issues, market confidence, grid capacity, consumer awareness. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Just before we move on to the others, Chris, I've got one little extra question for you on that. What can we learn from other countries about heat pump success? We're obviously looking at the picture we have here, but are there any really good examples of how to do it or how not to do it elsewhere from where we should be learning some lessons fast?
I think if we were to take one example, it would be Scandinavia, and probably specifically take Finland. Scandinavian countries have got some of the highest per capita penetration levels for heat pumps. Now, it's partly due to regulation banning oil boilers, a low carbon electricity supply grid, and the lure of lower running costs over direct electric heaters, that have been historically very popular in that part of the world. Latterly, I think laws requiring high standards of efficiency for new buildings and growth in the new building sector has also had a bit of a positive impact. But if we take just Finland, for example, Finland has a population of about 5.5 million, so not a million miles away from Southern Ireland or Norway, as compared with our population of 68 million. Yet we've sold in last year 36,000 heat pumps. In Finland, they sold last year 102,000 heat pumps.
Wow. Okay.
And that represents nearly a third. Well, sorry, I'm going to say that they've now installed heat pumps into a third of all homes in Finland. So as an example, it's an extremely good model to choose. If I'm being honest, a lot of Europe also have been very, very successful. Europe collectively increased their sales in 2020 by about 7.5% over the previous year, despite COVID, of heat pumps. And there are certain factors, that are certain common denominators that are shared amongst those particularly successful companies, which are things like a low carbon electricity supply grid and the banning of fossil fuels. And most importantly, as my last point was, that a fuel price ratio in favour of electricity. And currently in this country, our fuel price ratio is about 5.6 to 1 in favour of gas. So it really needs to move to somewhere like 3 to 4, depending on the kind of, to give cost parity, depending on the COP of the heat pump.
Excellent.
So those are some of the key points.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. And the Finnish example, as you say, different contexts, some different conditions and regulations, but it does give you an idea of the potential, but also to some degree how far we are behind even the start line. So with that overview in place, I already see some questions coming through. I think Julia was a trailblazer, followed by Chris, and there are more coming now and comments in the chat. So we need to get through things and make sure we have time for the audience. So on that note, moving swiftly then on to number 2, Craig, you're part of a renewables team with the largest service fleet in the UK. So share with us some of your opening insights and thoughts to get us thinking, please, Craig.
Okay, yeah, so thank you. So just building on what Chris was saying, really, the supply chain in the UK has generally been built around gas central heating systems, and Vaillant have been a key part of that supply chain building. And so we know all the nuances and details that are needed to help develop and grow that supply chain further. And, you know, we were one of the first, if not the first, traditional manufacturer to move from non-condensing boilers to condensing boilers in the UK, and we're going to be starting to build heat pumps in our Belper factory from summer next year. So we've already made that investment to grow the supply chain from the manufacturing side. But there's no point in having the product without having the downstream. So at Vaillant, we're really focused on the system approach. So everything downstream from the heating appliance. If you get the heating system design correct for British properties, then you can select different heat sources that suit that property type, moving away from fossil fuel heating and towards heat pumps and electrification or hydrogen further down the line. So if you lower the system flow temperature through the heating system, then you automatically get an efficiency gain and a carbon reduction as part of that. So that's something that we're pushing really heavily. Kind of, the old adage of poor preparation, poor performance, and we just got to take the installer along on that journey. So we've been working with other partners, the Heat Pump Association, the HHIC, and the Chartered Institute of Plumbing Engineers, and been very active in the development of the low and medium temperature flow temperature course, and making sure that we can roll that out to our network of installers, particularly Vaillant installers, but also the wider installers, and making a clear training pathway to help them develop their skills and relearn the habits that they may have lost over time in designing a heating system, a low and medium flow temperature heating system, and all of those kind of things, looking at the nuances that you need for heat pumps, siting of the outdoor unit, setting of the controls, moving from a on-off timer to weather compensation, and then most importantly, handing over to the homeowner, because we've got to take the homeowner and the consumer away from along the journey with us on this. So what to expect from your heating, because it is change and people are a bit fearful of change. We have to remember that heating is in that foundation block of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need sheltering, you need warmth, otherwise everything above it starts to fracture and come loose. And if people are fearful of their heating system or anything like that, then it really undermines everything else. So the installer, as an opinion leader or a key influencer in that, needs to relearn the skills when we were introducing gas central heating systems to remove that fear. You will be warm, you will be comfortable. When it's warm outside, your radiators won't quite be as warm because they don't need to be as warm. If you touch your radiator and it doesn't take your fingertips off, the heating system is still working, honestly, because you feel warm. It's one of those things in the heating industry, kind of the aim is to be invisibly brilliant, in that your heating system just works. We realistically, as a manufacturer, we don't really want you talking about us, because if you're talking about us, it means something isn't working right. So it's one of those things that we want to make people aware of heating, but we don't want them to be worried about heating. I'd rather they'd be thinking about their new kitchen cabinets or something really exciting like that, rather than, have I got enough hot water? And the end of the day, we're all aiming to get CO2 emissions down, but our heating our homes warm and comfortably without costing the earth. So we can all pull together in that direction.
Excellent, thank you, Craig. So very good to hear you embracing that sort of collaborative ethos, not just across the industry and with representative bodies, but with the consumer as well. And as you say, some of those are facing literally potentially heat or eat decisions as the cold weather arrives, and we need to be mindful of their priorities and how we communicate best with them in the most useful fashion. Also, your system approach, looking downstream, and a quite nice analogy almost that in a way heating is a bit like the referee in a football match or something. When they're having a good game, nobody talks about them, and it's nice to think that you consider kitchen cabinets exciting conversation. Good to hear. But no,
guess who's doing a house renovation?
That's right. we can see the way you're thinking now. So, but some of those more systemic approaches brings me nicely on actually to John Williams. John, as an enabler and an accelerator of energy systems innovation. So, with that kind of brief, if you could give us your opening thoughts, please.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, sorry, getting some horrible feedback. Okay. Can everybody else go on mute?
We'll try muting.
Okay, Craig, can you go on mute? So we're getting some nasty feedback from somewhere. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Well, we'll just take a moment and see if John can rectify the audio. Have you? Do you think there's something you can tweak there, John? Maybe we'll buy John Williams some time shall we go to John Felgate first and give you, John Williams, a moment to have a play with things at your end. So if we go now to John Felgate, so as a technical expert on domestic heat pumps, John, give us your thoughts, please, without the feedback.
Yeah, hopefully you can all hear me clearly. So I love heat pumps, self-confessed heat pump lover. And I'm fascinated by the challenges that face us regarding the rollout of heat pumps in the UK. We're doing it for probably 15, nearer 17 years. So I've seen quite a lot of changes with different incentive schemes that have come and gone, and improvements in product design as well. I really enjoyed reading the Right paper though, and listening today, because it gave me a concise view of the challenges and opportunities facing the heat pumps in the UK from all angles. But it made me think about two distinct areas. So I'd like to split my few minutes into two, if that's okay. Firstly, I'd like to speak about the market for heat in the UK and to ask you, the audience, for ideas. Secondly, a plea for help. We are and will face challenges regarding the capability of the electric grid, as Chris mentioned, in the UK. So I'll speak for a few minutes about what we can do to help with that growing problem. And some ideas from you would be great on that as well. So yeah, first up, the market for heat. I agree with Chris. Decarbonising heat is perhaps the greatest challenge to achieving the UK's net zero target. If we're to succeed, I think we all need to understand the UK market for heat very clearly and provide low carbon solutions for each sector. So I'll start by saying I don't have the answers here. I'm asking, but I am fascinated by the debate, and watching it roll out. I'm equally fascinated to find out how each of these sectors will decarbonise in the next few years. So the first one, perhaps the most important or the biggest in terms of energy consumption or kilowatt hours of heat consumed, is that distressed purchase. Oh God, my boiler's broken. The household is without heating and hot water. Complete disaster. It's winter. If you have a gas or a fossil fuel boiler, you can buy a replacement and have it installed within a day or two. The supply chain is there to support it. You could nip down to the merchant and buy it. There's no skill shortage. There are enough local installers within a stone's throw of your house to get the job done. So to decarbonise that sector, that distressed purchase bit, I think we need to get to the homeowner before the boiler fails. That's it in just a few words. We need to get to them first. And I guess the way to do that is with incentive schemes. Chris mentioned stamp duty, rebates, tax reductions, and private finance, maybe. So yeah, that's that one. The second one I thought of was the local authority and housing association market. And that market's driven more by operational costs, running costs, OPEX, let's say. And they have a responsibility to the community they serve. There's also, I think, a big benefit in this sector when it comes to rolling out reasonable volumes of heat pumps, because you only have to engage with one or two decision makers in order to treat or upgrade a large number of homes. One or two people might be responsible for thousands of homes. So I think that's a real opportunity. There are challenges, of course. The ones I've come across, local authorities don't want to have to run around reading meters and billing tenants. I think district heating or mini district heating could be good here, although there are challenges with that, such as the tenant should have the right to change electricity supplier or energy supplier. You go to uswitch.com or whatever, and you change your energy supplier every 3 weeks. It's important to retain that to give the market competition. I'm sure I don't need to tell those of us attending this meeting that heat pumps offer a buffer against rising energy costs, because a large proportion of the energy they provide comes from the environment. So a rise in energy costs has a smaller impact, and that's important when it comes to fuel poverty issues. So I think, heat pumps can play a part there. Uptake's a bit slow, in my view. It'd be interesting to see what other people think. The last one on my list really is the new build developers, because clearly that's driven by the capital cost, not the operational cost. It's all about build cost with a developer. But unlike the distressed purchase sector, it can be affected by legislation or regulation. So basically, it's a stick rather than a carrot. It's my third one on the list because heat loads are small, of course, compared with existing housing stock, because they're all super insulated and new build. So the impact on CO2 emissions is less than in other sectors. However, it's cheaper to install heat pumps in that sector than retrofit. It's a lot easier. You can design it and plan it in an early stage. There's no skill shortage really. Enough people on site to do the job. So they were my three sort of areas. I think there will need to be a mixture of technologies, but I'd like to ask the audience how we or you would roll out or encourage the uptake of low to zero carbon technologies in the distressed purchase scenario, the local authority housing association one, and of course the new build market. What would it take? How would you go about it? Second thing I wanted to raise was, I just wanted to touch on the challenges facing the electric grid. I'm fairly well plugged into this, if you pardon the pun. I attend various trade association meetings to do with streamlining the process of applying to your network provider for permission to install a heat pump. So, the thing is, I'm sure you can imagine the load is going up as we're encouraged to use electric vehicles. That's going really quick, and of course to electrify heat by using heat pump technology. That's underway. And we are doing what we can to streamline the process. But my advice here is to involve the network companies as early on in the project as possible. Very often it's thought of too late. So, call the local DNO, explain what you're trying to achieve. But perhaps more interesting to the minds online today, how can we shift our energy consumption to ease demand on the grid? That's a good one for debate. Trouble with heating, as I'm sure you understand, is that we all need it at the same time. When it gets cold outside, everyone turns the heating on. So this means with heat pumps, we all draw electricity from the grid at the same time. So how do we solve that problem? As an example, perhaps an electric tariff is available that offers cheaper electricity during certain times of the day. Do you think it's possible to deliberately overheat the fabric of your building when the electric's cheap, so that you don't have to consume electricity during the times when it's more expensive? Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad. Battery storage and heat pumps could work well together as well. To finish, I want to know what you think really. How do we apply heat pumps to the different sectors of the UK market for heat, and how can we help with the challenges facing the electric infrastructure in the UK? I've been ignoring the chat, by the way, but I can see it scrolling on the right-hand side of my screen. So I hope there's some interest there. But Jim, perhaps back to you now then.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Yeah, and as you say, the chat is very busy with debate, and we've got some questions. Our remind the audience to pop your questions in the ask a question box and your comments or your points of information more in the chat. It's perfect. So thank you, John. So nice point about the distressed purchase. You know, it's not the ideal scenario to start discussing new technologies when the house is going cold and the water's not hot. We need to get in earlier. We need to have that conversation sooner. That is not necessarily the ideal scenario for pitching. Also good points about local authorities and housing association markets, as well as new build, and that plea for help, the grid, and how we shift consumption patterns to avoid those spikes and those obvious log jams in terms of usage. So there, we're going back now. It sounds like the Eurovision, going back to our bureau where you are, John Williams. So we hope you're receiving us now. So perfect.
Yes, yeah, Derby calling.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me okay?
So do come in, Derby, as an enabler and accelerator of energy systems innovation. What are your thoughts, please, John?
Okay, well, my first thought is that preparing for these things by testing the mic in advance doesn't work. But moving on, I think one of the advantages of going last here is that we can just kind of try and tie things up. And as you've said, the catapult and the role I have there is very much focused on whole system effects and how you have to ensure the whole system is available to support things like heat pump rollout. Now, we've touched on things like network capacity and ensuring that that's in place and ready to support a rollout. And this is where touching on the point about local authorities is really important, because these authorities can get involved in understanding their local area, the opportunities in those area for either generation or transmission of energy, and how that plays into local housing stock and what a good solution might be for residents in their area. And then the local authority can play a part in perhaps helping to promote low carbon heating options and acting as sort of a trusted broker, a trusted advisor. So I think that local area aspect is really key. The main thing I want to talk about, though, really is the consumer angle. This is something that all the other parties on this call have spoken about already. But just to pick up on the point about that, I think it was Chris was making about heating being something that ideally we want to be in the background. That's actually a real problem, because it's already been mentioned that awareness of heat pumps is low, and I think numbers of less than 30% were mentioned of people being aware of a heat pump. But it's actually worse than that, because generally people don't actually think about heat or heating unless there's a problem. Obviously, there are large numbers of people which perhaps in fuel poverty, where the choice of put heating on or not is a really key decision. But for a lot of other people, as long as the heating's there and it's working, it just really doesn't come to mind. It's not something that we make discerning decisions about unless we're choosing a nice looking radiator or something as part of our redecoration. So the question is, in the absence of a strong policy intervention, banning boilers, for example, or even with that, what is that consumer proposition that makes people want a heat pump over any other solution? What makes them willing or able or ready to pay the cost or accept the cost? And also, if you're retrofitting a heat pump into an existing home, that can cause a level of disruption. It can cause need to update plumbing, change radiators, or in the case of one of my good friends, lose the spot where the barbecue sits. So what makes me want to take on board that disruption and live with it? And I think this is where we need to think about, what can we say about low carbon heating that's different? What's the thing I get that I don't have today? But I don't have the answers. I don't think everybody does, but there's a bunch of different ways you could look at here. So one thing we need to think about is, how do we get people to care about heating? One of the things that we've seen through research the Catapult has done is that if you give people better control of how their heating works, they may pay more attention to it, and this gets them more engaged with the whole process. So this is where we can look at things like digitalization, control systems, linking to connected homes and so on. But bearing in mind, of course, that there will be some people within the population that may struggle with those things, and that needs to be borne in mind too. The analogy I use here is that EVs got mentioned, and they're something that's doing really well. It's, growing quickly. But if I get into a Tesla, I still know how to drive it. It's still got a steering wheel and an accelerator and a brake. I don't have to totally learn about what cars are again in order to be able to drive one. So how do we make that transition simple? The other aspects, though, we've talked about raising awareness. But to me, one of the biggest things that you could do, or we could look at doing, is how do you help people get a better outcome from their heating system? So Chris talked about, ideally, it's just there and it works and it's great. But we know that a lot of people have heating today that doesn't work, or maybe they've got a cold room, they've got damp spots in their house. How do you solve that problem? And I think one of the big potential advantages that the heat pumps and other low carbon heating systems have is this real strong focus on design, making sure that the design is done well and works well for the house in question. It's a bit like going to Savile Row and ordering a bespoke suit as opposed to getting one off the peg. If you can afford that, if you're willing to pay that, can I get something better than the kind of default option I get just by replacing my boiler? So if we can think about how do we change the model from buying a thing to buying the outcome, that I think will be quite interesting. And that's where we get to things like heat service propositions and so on. So I'll just finish with an analogy because I like analogies. So I've mentioned EVs, so I'll jump into smartphones now. It's often said that nobody knew they needed an iPhone until it was invented. Right, that's not true. Right, before iPhones were invented, we all made phone calls, we all sent text messages. We were used to doing that. We were used to having a thing in our pocket. We all used the internet. We all bought stuff on Amazon and we used apps. We just did it on a laptop or a PC. All the iPhone did was make all of that stuff much easier and more convenient. Yeah. So how do we take the whole process of selecting heating more convenient? What do I get that I don't get today? And that's the thought I'll leave everybody with.
Perfect. Nice thought to end on there. Very, very good, John. I mean, nice point about the trusted broker. You're looking at the consumer angle, the incentive, the motivation, and also the reality of disruption and the need to sell, to pitch, to overcome some of those misgivings. You suggested control systems may appeal to some, especially if they're wanting to take ownership of the scenario. But crucially, a big plug for design, and that could be designed to make it aspirational, but it could just be designed to make it easy and a thing that's elegant in its simplicity. So some really nice points there to take us through to the questions. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. We've already got a few. We've got a lot of great comments in the chat. Do have a read through those as well. As I say, keep them coming, post them in the bottom. So first up, I'm going to take, I think, first, this one from Chris Bray, and I'll read a couple of the responses as well. Chris is asking, how many new homes are being fitted with heat pumps? If house builders are not leading on this, why would the individual homeowner be convinced? Now, I'll just add that we've already had Catherine Daper at Carla within Scotland saying around a third of new homes, but it might be a lower percentage in England. And I think Craig's already said yes, very few in England. And the dilemma is you can meet the requirements of the building regs with the boiler, no incentive to go beyond that. So why would you? So I think if I come to you first, Craig, and also John Felgate, because I think you both mentioned new build. What are the percentage? Why is it so low? Why aren't house builders doing more to change this situation around? Craig, first up, what can we do with new build?
They don't have to.
How can we encourage them?
We are encouraging them, but we've put it off till 2025. So in 2025, there's going to be no gas boilers into new build, which is great. But it's in 2025. So, the house builders, they may do test sites. So you'll see a slight proportion as they learn and get their contractors up to speed on heat pumps. But at the moment, you build a house on paper and it comes out with a cost, and you don't need to change that at the moment because it meets all the requirements. So why change? It's just going to increase your costs and increase your time, particularly at the moment when everybody's so focused on that. They don't have to change. If they're, if your building regs pass point is here, the builders want to hit here. If they hit here, they've spent that much too much on the house. If you fit a heat pump now and you keep the fabric as it is and you fit a heat pump, you're up here somewhere. So the accountant's going to say, well, why are you spending that much more money when we don't need to do it? There's no incentive. The building reg should be the base of what needs to be done. And then there should be a mechanism in place to incentivize builders to go beyond the regulations.
So cost is an issue. Effectively, we're facing a green premium. You can forget about demand, forget about industry dialogue. You're sort of saying unless the regs come into play, unless the stick comes out, we're never going to have enough carrots to make it happen. Is that?
No, it doesn't necessarily have to be a stick. There could be an incentive to go beyond the building regs. And then I'm sure the builders would like to go beyond the building regs. But at the moment, there's no incentive to do it. So why change?
Cool. But John Felgate, if you'd like to come in, and then maybe also Chris, because you talked about cost. But John Felgate, you did talk about the new house builders.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a story with you, really. It's an old story from 2008, when do you remember nobody could sell houses in 2008? Those of you who go back that far, big housing crisis. We were working with a developer in North Wales, and he had a row of houses on either side of the road, and he couldn't sell them. But he went down one side and he put solar panels on the roof. He didn't even connect the solar panels, he just put them on the roof. And those properties were more desirable and sold before the other ones. Of course, he went and connected them before people moved in. He didn't just leave them on the roof. But it's interesting because there is a marketing side to the builder developer as well. If you can appeal to them and say that you could sell your property easier or even for more money if it's green and it's got something visible, then I think they're more willing to do it. But also, of course, yes, we need to drive it with legislation and building regs and SAP certificates and energy performance certificates. All of that kind of stuff needs to happen as well. But yeah, on the more positive side, maybe we can appeal to them and say, look, make a product, make a house that people really want, especially younger people are sort of coming up through the generations. They do want to be seen to be green.
Cool. Yeah.
They pay for it.
Good point. That aspiration element, that is the key to lighting the touch paper of demand, really, which can, not alone, but it can certainly help. And once that gets momentum, as we all know, it kind of goes viral and everybody has to have one, and it turns on makeover shows on the TV, etc. We are not there, but that is a scenario. So Chris, if I could bring it across to you, you talked about cost. I've also got a little question I'll ask you about RHI afterwards, but first up on cost, have you got any thoughts to add to what Craig and John have just said about the fact that at the moment it's an obstacle, realistically?
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I mean, it's clear and obvious that it's going to take legislation to force the house builders to change their current option. So, I mean, we should also remember that and I often quote this, in the self-build market, very often heat pumps, particularly combined with underfloor and radiator mix, the self-build market is very often the preferred choice, okay, albeit it might be that they don't have access to gas, but the reality is an awful lot of people who actually buy those properties and put heat pumps in during the build phase, then when they eventually get used to the product, would very often say they would never swap it back to having gas. They really learn to live with the product and love the product.
Yeah, maybe we need, it's a bit like TripAdvisor or whatever for heating. Maybe we need more testimonials as to why it's great and why other people should follow suit. I know that sounds glib, but that is potentially how consumer markets begin to move around. If I could follow up there, and we've got less than 10 minutes now, so get those questions in. We're going to fire through. If I could follow up with a second one for you there, Chris, just quickly. The first question we had actually was from Julia Shajika, asking, do you have a heads up on what, if anything, will replace the renewable heat incentive, RHI? Should I just wait should I wait or install now before the cutoff date? You mentioned that March RHI. Are we any the wiser, Chris? Should you wait or install now?
what's going to replace it actually is the clean heat grant. So the RHI will be replaced in it runs till March 2022, and then it's replaced with the clean heat grant, which effectively, it's taking over from that. But the eligibility criteria are very much the same as the RHI, as far as we know. I mean, there are a number of differences in this, but the key difference is the funding available. So the Clean Heat Grant will provide vouchers that will cover upfront costs of up to £7,000, as far as we know. While from the RHI, okay, you can earn annual payments for 7 years based on your heat demand annually. But currently, through the tariff system of RHI, it's actually possible to earn up to 28 grand over a period of 7 years. But when compared to this, the funding is quite limited through the Clean Heat Grant. But the other thing is that this grant's set to only last for 2 years, which comes back to one of my earlier points, that this is the problem, that if it's all short term, it's a significant problem for long-term growth. You need to extend that time and extend the amount of funding that will be available. But other than that, it's essentially operating the same way.
Sure, and I think short-termism always a challenge for sustainable growth, if you like. Before we come to one of the other questions we've got there, I've got a little bit of a challenge for you, John Williams. Now you have your headphones on. It's about, obviously, we have a lot of attractive product, and it's great some of it's being manufactured in the UK, etc. Yep. But my question really is systemic thinking. Do we need to put more time and money into scaling the innovation we already have, mainstreaming uptake, as you suggested, rather than endlessly chasing shiny new solutions? In other words, it's systems and capacity, not product.
I think, it's a really good question. Yeah, look, I think innovation, development of existing product is always a good thing to do. Improving the performance of the units, reducing running costs and so on, that's all great. But I think that what that does is it helps you choose one brand over another. Maybe I'm going to pick one of Chris's heat pumps over one of the competitions, for example. Sorry, I didn't mean Chris there. I meant Craig. Sorry, Craig. Maybe I'll buy one of yours over one of the competition. But the reality is the technology works. It's there. We have design processes. It works well when it's designed well and when it's installed well. That's not the problem. The problem, as we've talked about already, is getting the wider system, the energy system, ready to deal with it and making people want it. So yes, I'd be putting more emphasis on innovation in service models, customer propositions, and that kind of thing. Because as Chris, I get it right this time, mentioned, when people have got it and they've lived with it and they know it works well, they're sold. It works. That's the technology is not the problem.
Excellent, thanks. And we're really running into the last 5 minutes now. One very quick question from Beanland. It says, when will we get to see data from the heat pump demonstrator program? Does anybody have an answer for that?
Bean asks me this question about every 2 weeks.
Okay.
I'll give you the answer I always give you, Bean. I'm working on it.
Okay, there you go.
No. So in all seriousness, I think Bean's referring to the BEAMA project here. We are we are looking to publish data from that project imminently. The exact date I don't know, but it is very soon, hopefully, and that'll include installation data and hopefully monitoring at a later point in time as well.
Excellent. And then I think this might be almost our last question, and so I'll have a run round the panel. But if I'm taking this question from Julia, another Julia, I think. For homeowners contemplating air source heat pumps, the requirements for upgrading efficiency, in addition to finding and install, make it quite complicated process to approach different contractors, all of whom seem to have their own special hymn sheets. So she's asking, can we get a more joined up approach whilst catering for obviously numerous individual and bespoke circumstances? So maybe I can walk that around the panel, starting with you, Craig, because you touched on a collaborative ethos. If we're looking to hit these demanding targets in this short period of time, all the numbers we talked about at the top of the show about how fast and how big we need to go, it's going to need team working. So how do we get a more joined up approach, Craig? Do you think it can be done?
It's a really good question, and it's a really hard answer, because generally, you have an electrician that does your wiring, you have a plumber that does your bathrooms and your heating, you have a kitchen fitter that does your kitchens, you have your window fitter that fits your windows, and they all might know each other, but they're not going to talk to each other regarding it. So when you're looking at a whole house renovation, it becomes easier when you've got a builder and you can coordinate that, and you can say, I want low carbon heating, and I want to reduce the energy intensity of my house. So you should always take a fabric first approach, and you don't have to do all of it in one go. I think there's this big myth that if you fit in a heat pump, that's it, you've got to gut the house, rip everything out, start afresh, when that's generally not the case. The first step realistically is to get a proper heat loss calculation done of your property, because you might have a 43 kilowatt open vent boiler and find out that your heat load is only 8 kilowatts because you've done the cavity wall years ago, you've put extra loft insulation in years ago, or maybe the previous owner did. You've now got double glazing, and the boiler was vastly oversized anyway because the guy that fitted it in the first place had one in his lockup. So look at what the requirement of the house is. See if there's anything that you can do reasonably practicably to reduce the heat load. Then look at your heating system. Cool. Just to bust a myth, there's no such thing as an oversized radiator, everybody. There's a correctly sized radiator and an incorrectly sized radiator. So, just get your radiators sized correctly. And it might be that the radiators that are in place are the right size because they were designed for a 70 degree or an 80 degree flow temperature, and now you've put you've done all the fabric improvements, and they'll run at a mean temperature of 50 degrees. So, get the house assessed first.
Cool. Lots of good points made there. A lot of which means find out where you're starting from on the map before you begin your actual journey. So if we have a quick whiz round, I'm going to go to John Felgate, John Williams, and then finish with Chris, and we've got about a minute. So John Felgate, if we're going for this joined up thinking and working, do you see it happening, and how could it happen more?
I think when it comes to making a decision, you have to find somebody you trust. So I would advise talk to 2 or 3 installers, find somebody you trust. But I would also suggest run the solution by the manufacturer of the kit that's being installed. We're free, and we've got a whole wealth of experience. And we'd flag it if it was going wrong.
Excellent, nice point. Trust, but also talk to the manufacturer. They actually will listen to you, and they'll give you free advice. John in Derby. Exactly. How are we doing this? How are we joining things up better, more, faster?
Better, more, faster. Wow. I think one of the things that's nice about this talk today is we've actually covered a huge range of topics. We've talked about everything from the manufacturers, the installers, to the networks at the other end. So I think the fact that we're talking about it is a brilliant start. And I would just encourage everybody in that network to keep developing it. I don't think there's a silver bullet. It's communication. Keep going.
Excellent communication, and we are now at the hour mark. So Chris, final words to you, and of course you might want to suggest how the role of an organization like BEAMA can actually help facilitate that collaborative approach, which means all boats are lifted, everybody's a winner.
Yeah, my points just very quickly would be that building regulations will future-proof our homes ready for low carbon heating. I mean, that probably doesn't solve Julie's issue if you're looking at retrofit. Yes, I think trade associations have a part to play in providing this sort of collaborative process or assisting it in some way or another. So yeah, I think that's the case. I think from BEAMA's perspective, with regard to this whole issue, the conversation we've been having today, I think that BEAMA industry has shown that it's got the capability and desire to overcome the challenges about delivering this whole target of of 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. But we're entirely reliant on government demonstrating that this is a critical, as it's a critical component of UK energy policy, that the decarbonisation of heat will be supported by a stable, long-term policy environment and address particularly the distorted price mechanism that currently still favours gas. And I want to get that point and do those 2 points in very strongly at the end of this session. And I think those are two of the most important points.
Thank you. And a good endorsement of the fact the industry is coming together in dynamic fashion, but it needs government at the table. It needs that policy framework. It needs those levers to be pulled to get the kind of acceleration and growth that we've been talking about. So we haven't got round to every single question. There's chat galore. It's been a really strong engagement session. So hope you've enjoyed it. So in closing then, big thank you to our panelists, obviously, Craig, John, and of course, Chris and our series partners at BEAMA. To yourselves out there on Crowdcast, loads and loads of comments and your excellent questions. A reminder to check out elementalexpo.com, the online community for professionals focused on innovation, heat, water, air and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. As I said at the top of the show, you'll find a full diary of events on the website, all those upcoming webinars, 6 more sessions in this excellent Zero Carbon Home series with BEAMA, and this will be available on demand for you to rewatch, but also for you to share it free, of course, with colleagues or clients or anybody else you think would benefit from listening to the discussion we've had. There's a whole back catalogue on the website of other sessions as well. So thank you again. That's it for today. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SustMeme. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.